Welcome to the game line. Ireland reminds me of a raging river. No matter how much pressure you put on them, they will always find a way to keep surging forward. Today, we'll be looking at how this Irish team managed to bolt ahead in the first half with their consistent pressure on attack. Then, we'll look at how Wales managed to gain the momentum early in the second half before capitulating in the final 20. Let's start with how Ireland's attack managed to overwhelm Wales, even though they didn't dominate the gain line in certain areas. There are a number of reasons for this, but the main ones have to be their lightning quick ruck speed and the fact that they prioritize wider distribution a bit more in this game compared to their previous encounters against France and Italy. Furthermore, even though Wales did manage to hit their pods behind the gain line, which we'll get to a bit later, they still managed to get a lot of post-contact meters. This meant that they were very rarely on the back foot and that they had lots of ball security throughout their attacking phases. Wales's defence was really solid when it came to shutting down Ireland's attacking pods. They put extra emphasis on these groups and they managed to hit them well behind the gain line on many occasions. But this rush defence did leave them more vulnerable on the outside of the field, which Ireland exploited well. They gave a lot of passes out the back to their backline players, which allowed quick distribution to the side of the field. Ireland made a massive 252 passes during this match and 159 carries. While they didn't get massive momentum with their midfield pods like they did against France or Italy, their great distribution allowed them to put pressure on the outside of the field where Wales weren't as strong defensively. This is where a lot of their pressure and meters came from, and it constantly put the Welsh under pressure, causing lots of discipline issues. Another small detail about Ireland's attack is that Jamison Gibson-Park played extremely well and caused uncertainty amongst the Welsh defenders. There were many times when he would take the ball to the defensive line before giving it to his attackers. This gave them more time and space and allowed them to strike more efficiently on the wings. However, Wales's defensive integrity has to be commended. They ended the match with an 85% tackle completion rate, and it consistently stayed around the low 90s throughout the majority of the first half. This is impressive given that Wales had to make 192 tackles against an Irish attack that was at its best. In the end, this massive amount of pressure did have a price. Many of Wales's 12 penalties came because they were caught offside or they committed an offence at the ruck out of necessity. Ireland's quick ball forced Wales to try and put pressure on the breakdown to attempt to slow down the ball. Unfortunately for Wales, the penalties that Ireland gained from these situations only put them in better situations and gave them opportunities to apply pressure and advance up the pitch. It's remarkable how solid this Irish attack really is. Make no mistake, this was not a bad defensive performance by Wales. In my opinion, Wales put more pressure on Ireland's attack than both France and Italy, and the fact that they were able to have the skill and vision to be dangerous despite this should be commended. Another thing that I'd like to highlight before moving on is the fact that Wales were keeping the ball in the field of play, particularly during exits when they kicked to Ireland's back three. I honestly don't know why they did this. It might be because they were backing their defense to overwhelm Ireland's attack and shut them down. It might also be that they were trying to increase the ball in play time. Whatever the reason, it gave Ireland more chances to counter-attack and allowed them to keep piling on the pressure. It might have been a better idea for Wales to slow the game down and to focus on the line-out, where Ireland did struggle a bit, which we'll get to later. What was just as impressive as their attack was Ireland's defensive effort. They made 190 tackles and had a 93% tackle success rate. While those are very impressive numbers, it doesn't quite tell the whole story. Wales only made 141 passes to 124 carries. What this means is that there were periods that Wales kept the game very tight and physical without moving the ball around too much. These periods came when Wales was in or around Ireland's 22. They would position their forwards very close to the ruck and prioritize speed to suck in as many defenders as possible. This also forced Ireland to make a lot of tackles, but they showed amazing intensity and discipline in these periods. Wales just couldn't get the go-forward ball that they were looking for, and it gave Ireland enough time to reset their defensive lines. This allowed Ireland to compete heavily at the ruck and win turnovers before Wales could even threaten the outside of the field. Overall, Ireland were just very dominant at the ruck for most of the match, and like I mentioned previously, it gave them a lot of solid platforms on attack. Another point about Ireland's defense for this game is that they prioritized connections over pressure. This did allow Wales to have more phases, but it meant that their defensive line was nigh impenetrable. Wales only managed one line break throughout the entire match. Essentially, Ireland would shoot up as one cohesive unit to meet the Welsh attackers behind the gain line. However, instead of pressing up high on the outside to snuff out their attack, Ireland would hold and see where the ball would be passed to. Like I said, this did allow Wales to have more possession because their support runners had more time to get to the ruck. But it also meant that their attack rarely looked threatening and that they were not going to break through the Irish defence. Another important part to their consistent momentum was their dominant scrum. Andrew Porter has struggled quite a bit in the previous 2 games against his opposites in the scrum, and it has been slightly concerning. In this game, however, he really made up for it. I thought the entire Irish front row really put on a great performance against an up-and-coming Welsh front row. They managed to get a good amount of penalties from the scrum, and it gave Ireland excellent platforms throughout the match. This leads me to my second point about Ireland's set piece, which was their mauls. Ireland managed to set some great platforms from the front of the line-out, and it led to many of their tries. This is an integral part of their game, as a lot of Ireland's tries this year have come from this area. They did, however, struggle at the back of the line-out. This is one of the few weak areas that this Irish team experienced on Saturday, and it caused a lot of disruptions and made them disorganised at times. Unfortunately for Wales, they couldn't capitalise on these mistakes and pounce on the opportunities given to them. There was a brief period of about 15 minutes where Wales managed to gain the upper hand after half-time. One of the reasons for this was that Wales were able to keep the game more structured through kicking. They managed to push the Irish back and keep them pinned in their own half for a large portion during this period. A big reason for this was Wales's back three. One of the few beacons of light for Wales was the fact that Winnett, Adams and Dyer had great positioning and were quite accurate during the kicking game. I thought that Winnett in particular showed great maturity during high pressure moments. When Wales put up pressure-based kicks, they managed to disrupt Ireland quite effectively and put themselves on the front foot. They were able to recover 1 or 2 of these kicks as well. Another reason for this Welsh momentum swing was the fact that Ireland's discipline started to falter in this period. There were some issues and small mistakes, particularly in the line-out, that allowed Wales to get a good amount of successive penalties, which they used to advance up the pitch. In total, Ireland ended the match with 13 penalties, one more than Wales. This also resulted in Wales's penalty try and Byrne being sent off. But, like I mentioned, this Irish defence held very strong, and Wales only managed to get 1 try from these 20 minutes or so. So, how did Ireland manage to come back and close the game so strongly? I think the biggest reason was that Wales had to do such a large amount of defending during the game. Like I mentioned before, both teams had to make a similar amount of tackles, but Wales had to cover a lot more ground because Ireland were moving the ball across the pitch so much. This led to Wales being very fatigued in the last quarter, which decreased the intensity that they were defending at. All of a sudden, Ireland were managing to dominate in areas where they struggled in the first half, particularly in the middle of the field. Their pods managed to have a lot of dominant carries, and they had a lot of line breaks as well. Ireland had a total of 12 line breaks throughout the match, with many of them coming in this period. With Ireland finding space on the outside and dominating in the middle of the field, it felt like an unstoppable wave, and they were bound to score a few more tries. I'd love to hear what you thought of this game, and if anyone can prevent this Irish team from getting a Grand Slam. See you next time.